Okay, can I have your attention, please? Glad to have you all here today. I'm Ed Lazowska from UW Computer Science and Engineering, and I'm happy to welcome you to the sixth and final talk in our Distinguished Lecturer Series this year. It's been a great season. We've had speakers from Google and Intel and Stanford University, and today I'm delighted to be able to introduce Judy Estrin to you. Judy's a remarkable person, and she's from a remarkable family. I want to say a word about that first. Somewhere in the audience is Jean-Luc Baer, who was my predecessor as department chair. There he is, and he was the first assistant professor hired by the department, and his PhD advisor was Judy's dad, Jerry, who was a longtime UCLA computer science faculty member. Judy's mom, Thelma, was a longtime UCLA computer science faculty member. Judy's sister, Debbie, is currently a UCLA computer science faculty member who was just inducted into the National Academy of Engineering this year. Judy's other sister, Margot, is a medical doctor, and there's one person in the entire Estrin family who doesn't have a doctoral degree, and she's here to speak to us today. So Judy has a phenomenal record as an entrepreneur. She's co-founded 7 companies. Through acquisitions and others, she served, among other things, as the chief technical officer of Cisco for a number of years. She's on the board of Walt Disney, which means that she has a little mouse on her briefcase. It's hard to take, as she says, it's hard to take corporate memos seriously when they all have a little mouse on the letterhead. And she's recently written a wonderful book called Closing the Innovation Gap, which is the core of the material she'll talk about today. And she asked that her honorarium be devoted to buying copies of the book for members of the audience who ask questions at the end. So you should be thinking of your questions, and I'll be running books around. Finally, I want to mention that while our Industrial Affiliates program provides most of the sponsorship for the Distinguished Lecturer Series, we have a number of co-sponsors of today's talk representing the broad interest in Judy's work. So aside from UW Computer Science and Engineering, I want to thank the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Foster School of Business, Google Seattle, the Technology Alliance, the Washington Technology Industry Association, and the IEEE Computer Society, all of whom are joining us in welcoming Judy Estrin here today. Judy, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ed. It's a pleasure to be here, and you didn't need to point out that I'm the black sheep in my family, but that it is true that my older sister and I discuss it because she's the only one not in computer science, and I'm the only one without a doctor in front of my name. So some people claim that I wrote this book because I never wrote a PhD thesis and I needed to write something. I realize we have a flaw in our system of handing out books because I don't think I'll leave time for 40 questions, but we'll have to figure out how to allocate the rest. Ed asked me to come up here and share some of my thoughts about innovation. I've been thinking a lot about this actually ever since I left Cisco in 2000, because coming out of the bubble, and actually in the time leading up to the bubble, I became very concerned about innovation in the country, and initially in Silicon Valley and in the business world. I also sit on the board of FedEx in addition to Disney. And as I began to present to more and more audiences, I realized that not only was the problem bigger than I thought it was, but there was such diversity in terms of what people thought about when you said the word innovation to them, that there seemed to be a need to try to explain a little bit more about what innovation is really all about, because to a lot of people you say innovation and they think a product, and there's so much more to innovation and to what creates innovation in a country or in an organization than an idea or a product development. That I actually like to talk about it as sustainable innovation, and what I mean by that is an environment that allows innovation to thrive. And Ed went through my background, and I'm not going to go through this slide other than to say that I came at this problem with an interesting perspective, because a lot of the people who talk about innovation are really talking to the business community and often to large corporations. And the fact that I spent most of my career as a serial entrepreneur gave me a slightly different perspective. Some people are Navy brats or Army brats. I'm an academic brat, having grown up in academia and then had my own involvement in that arena, but also have had experience with large companies through sitting on the board of Disney and FedEx, and my time as CTO at Cisco, which made me realize that the challenges of innovation are very different at scale than they are in small startup companies. And I include mother in here because this is really things that have influenced my perspective. Being a parent is one of them, and it's in the entrepreneurial column because it certainly takes a lot of flexibility, those of you who are parents know. And then in addition, as I was writing my book, I interviewed over 100 people in the sciences, in business, in policy, and each one of them influenced influence the thoughts that resulted in what I'm going to talk about. So in an audience like this, you probably don't need to explain that innovation matters, but let me just say that it matters for more reasons than we normally think. There's no question that it is innovation that drives economic cycles and that drives the economy. It's also innovation that drives our quality of life. So whether it is new medicines that allow us to live longer or new entertainment devices that allow us to have more fun, it's really innovation that drives how we live. But today, more than ever before, we're faced with some major challenges, whether it's energy independence and reversing climate change, affordable and available health care, upgrading our education system, our standing in the world, all of those major challenges that we hear about every day. It's only by innovative thinking, it's only through innovation that we have any hope of addressing them. So it matters more than it ever has before, but we're taking it for granted more than we ever have before. We as a nation, much like companies that get very successful and take their success for granted, we've always been a leader in innovation. And as you look around, most people will say, what's wrong? We continue to lead in innovation. But innovation doesn't just happen, it has to be nurtured. And I often get a lot of pushback in that people, and certainly from Silicon Valley, of people who tell me, Judy, what are you talking about? There's innovation everywhere. Look at this new social network and this new type of device, and what about cloud computing, and what about sensor nets, and what about all these new medicines? What about a new type of car? Yes, there's lots of innovation going on. But in general, we've become more and more short-term focused in our innovation. We are reaping the benefits of decades of seeds that were planted, and we're not planting seeds at the same rate. And so the same way we have a trade deficit and a budget deficit, we have an innovation deficit. We are harvesting at a faster rate than we're planting the seeds, and that is going to continue to create a problem as we look for future generations, as we look at 10, 20, 30 years. One of my favorite quotes from one of my interviews was from Mark Andreessen, who I was talking to him about how quickly he developed the browser, and he said to me, Judy, the browser was the icing on a cake that had been baking for 30 years. And I was so happy to hear it come from him, as opposed to me saying it. And that's really true. It's on top of the web that was built on top of TCP/IP, that was built on top of packet switching, which had started essentially 30 years before. So we really have to be thinking about this balance. And as we talk about innovation, realizing that there are really multiple different types of innovation. There is the breakthrough innovation that most people think about that really are the significant innovations that have never been done before. So the transistor or the microprocessor, and we can go on and on. There's incremental innovation, which is making things incrementally better, cheaper, faster, easier to use. And then actually, although most people talk about just breakthrough and incremental, I actually think there's another type of innovation now that we have so much technology out there, and it's what I call orthogonal innovation, which is actually taking existing technologies, looking at a problem differently, which is why I call it orthogonal, and coming up with something that can be almost as disruptive as a breakthrough innovation. And two great examples of that are the iPod and iTunes. They didn't set out to build a new MP3 player, but a new music experience. And so by looking at the problem differently was really why it disrupted the market. A more recent example is Better Place, which is the company that isn't looking at how do I make battery technology last longer necessarily, but how do I build an infrastructure so cars that run on batteries can stop and in 5 minutes get their battery switched. So that's an orthogonal. It's looking at the problem differently, which is bringing a disruptive new technology. Now, why do I bring up these three different types? Is just the realization that we need all of them. So I'm not saying incremental innovation is bad, but you've got to have a balance, because only 1 in 3 can really be disruptive, and in terms of disrupting markets and creating new industries and creating new economic cycles. 2 is necessary, because we all know the first time you come out with something, the discovery itself is never quite usable enough and needs to be incrementally improved to bring it to market. And actually, incremental innovation is what elongates the market cycles, keeps it going for longer. But the other thing I think that's really important to remember is only incremental innovation is customer driven. And we have become, in business and society, so focused on the customer, which is good. But if you become solely focused on the customer, you're only giving people what they know they want. And breakthrough innovation, or disruptive or orthogonal innovation, actually the customer has no idea that they can have what it is that you're going to give them, or that they may need it or want it. And so companies that are solely driven by what their customers want will actually never come up with breakthrough or orthogonal innovations. And you need both. Again, you need the balance of them. And I put customers in quotes here because this is true not just of companies. If you think about government and innovating in government, the customers are citizens. Sometimes you have to make decisions that aren't the wisdom of the crowd, because the citizens don't know what it necessarily is right 10 years out. So again, a balance of responding to the needs of today versus actually having that vision. But all three of them are need driven. And sometimes it's simply the need to understand, or sometimes it's the need to solve a problem. So the other thing about innovation that I think makes so many people uncomfortable, and again, in a research university like this, I think this is more obvious, is that innovation is inherently messy, and it's why people don't like innovation. It is iterative. You have to be willing to invest without understanding what the outcome is, and people are uncomfortable with that, especially in a world where we've been increasingly focused on the word accountability. And accountability is not a bad word, but it does tend to kill innovation if everything has to be accounted for, and you need to leave room for innovation to happen. The other thing is that talent is so critical to innovation. Innovation, in the end, comes from people. And when you're talking about innovation, talent is not just skill and aptitude, but passion and drive, because it's that passion and drive that really differentiates true innovators from people who are great executors, but may not be innovators. And small teams with diverse perspectives is where I have seen the best innovation come from. And when I'm talking about diversity here, I'm not talking about race or gender, I'm talking about cognitive diversity. And so bringing people together with different perspectives. Another person I interviewed for the book, when we were talking about how to describe these small teams and the size of a team, he actually said the team should be no bigger than a jazz band. And I loved that phrase because the reason a jazz band is so effective, the size of a jazz band, is that the players can improvise off of each other. And that's what's so magical about small teams, is they're small enough to play off each other. If you get too big, you need a conductor. And the minute you need a conductor, then you may get incremental innovation, but the type of disruptive breakthroughs tend to go away when you have somebody telling people what to do at every step. When I was thinking about innovation at the beginning of this process, I wanted a way to describe the gestalt behind innovation and what was really involved in sustainable, again, what were the elements involved in sustainable innovation as opposed to just new product development. And I thought back to my early science training about biological ecosystems. Now, a lot of people in the business world, and I would say in the technical world overall, have become to think of the word as ecosystem differently. And you think of ecosystem as partnerships and pieces that interrelate together. What I'm talking about here is actually the biological definition of an ecosystem, and that is communities of living organisms that interact with each other and dynamically interact with their environment. And the reason I picked this analogy is actually that a biological ecosystem needs to be in balance to sustain life. So the way the communities interact and the environmental factors need to be in balance to sustain life. So what does the innovation ecosystem look like? There are three communities. The research community, which is about furthering understanding, about discoveries, and as important as anything else, about developing new minds. The development community, which is about innovating in the area of developing new products, new services. And the application community, which is applying science and technology in new ways. So it may be healthcare, it may be entertainment, it may be consumers using products, or enterprises. So the key thing here is this is not a line. It is a circle. And the three communities all need to exchange needs and questions between them for innovation to thrive. Let me give you two quick examples. Think about Google. So Google started out as an interesting algorithm in the research community. They spun out and started a company which was a product or a service, a search engine. But Google's real success actually came from their innovation in the application community. The business model of combining advertising and search, and as important, an IT infrastructure that allowed them to scale profitably and allow them to search the way that they do. So that is an interesting example how one company went through the different communities. Let's now look at a major problem like energy independence and reversing climate change. We need to modify our behavior in the application community. At the same time, we need new products that are more energy efficient and a lower carbon footprint. But we also need to be investing in research, both in alternative energy as well as in environmental sciences, to understand how our behaviors and changes in behaviors, what impact that is making and where the highest leverage is. So unless we are in balance across these three communities of the ecosystem, we are not going to actually be able to really make progress in solving our problems. So what are the environmental factors of an innovation ecosystem? In a biological ecosystem, it's sun, it's rain, it's fire. In the innovation ecosystem, it's leadership, funding, policy, education, and culture. And I maintain that those are really the 5 levers that you need to have correct to have innovation thrive. Again, whether it's a company or whether it's a country. And the most important are leadership and culture. Because if you have the right leadership, you will tend to get the policy, funding, and education right. And you need the right culture because in the end, the leader's job is to provide resources, a shared vision, inspiration, and then get out of the way and tear down the barriers, because in the end, innovation is bottom up, and it's the culture that provides that environment in which people will innovate. So let me talk a minute about the culture. It was funny, as I started to write the book, I had a writing coach who was teaching me how to write, and meaning I'd send him drafts and he'd send it back with these bold comments almost after every line that I wrote. But in my first draft, I had a sentence that says there is no rules behind innovation. There is no 10 steps to innovation. And he wrote back, you know, Judy, you can't do that. People are buying your book to try to figure out more about innovation. So you can't tell them there's no rules behind innovation. And we went back and forth on this multiple times about the fact that, and I will say, there are no rules to innovation. But there is a gestalt behind innovation. And there are a set of, I believe, common themes or qualities that go across innovative people, innovative organizations, innovative countries. And if I had to boil them down in a way that people could take away, and if you think about these 5 core values, which I claim combined create a capacity for change, and in the end, that's what you need in your culture. You need a capacity for change in order for innovation to take hold, that if you think about your decisions, your parenting, your policy, what you're doing as to whether you are encouraging or discouraging these core values, then in the end, you will end up with a more innovative environment. So what are they? The first one is questioning. I think everybody knows that curiosity drives innovation, but this is not just about curiosity. A second very important part of innovation and questioning is self-assessment. Because if you don't periodically stop and self-assess and be able to look at where you are, you'll innovate right into a wall. So a very important part of the innovation process is not just the initial questioning, but the ongoing questioning of even yourself and the direction that you're going in. It's really important how questions are framed, because if they're framed broadly, you'll get more likely get more disruptive innovation. If you frame a question very narrowly, you're going to constrain the answer that's going to come back. And it's really important that the questions are asked non-judgmentally, whether they're the way you ask yourself questions in your head or the way you're asking of others, because judgmental questions tend to make people defensive. Inquisitiveness tends to open people up. And so the way the questions are framed and the way they flow is an important part of the first value. The second is risk. What do I mean here? I mean being vulnerable, being willing to fail, understanding that learning from failure is a good thing, and to have an environment where people are encouraged to fail early and fail often. Now, if you can succeed without failure, that's fine. No one wants to fail, but that notion of getting to the first failure early. Pixar, which is one of the most innovative environments that I have ever seen, has built into their environment this incredible openness where people show their work and share their work very early in the process when they know it's not at a point where people are going to say this is great. It's because they want to get that feedback early. They want to, they see failure as essentially a step to success. One of the problems in the pharmaceutical industry today is it's too expensive to get to failure. And if we had more research and more ways to find failure early in terms of new drugs, that the whole industry would change. Openness to imagine, to new data, to collaborate and share, to surprise. We all know and have heard about things that have been discovered because of serendipity, from penicillin to Viagra to the Ethernet, which the people who were doing the research were actually doing research on something different than what they actually ended up discovering. But you also have to be open to change, because if you come up with a new idea or get new input, you have to be open to adapt and to change. Patience is the toughest. This is active patience. In an innovator, it means tenacity. It means the willingness to keep going through obstacles. In leaders and in investors, it's patience. Let things have time to grow, and don't automatically put these milestones on things that actually stifle innovation. And then trust. You have to trust in yourself to be an innovator, and you have to trust in others to allow innovation to happen. And in the end, safety nets like our bankruptcy laws, things like believing that you can educate your kids or have health care, are the types of things that encourage entrepreneurialism, encourage people to try something new, because they are taking risks, but they're not taking risks with the basic safety net of their environment. Now, you're not allowed to just pick one of these and say, I'm that and therefore I'm innovative. They really need to go together and they need to be in balance. And let me give you two quick examples. If you have trust without questioning, that's blind faith. And blind faith is not innovative. It is actually anti-innovative. But probably a more timely example is if you have risk without questioning, that's gambling. If you have risk without questioning and you don't have openness or transparency as to what you're taking risks on, you end up with the financial crisis, because then you lose trust. And so the taking risk without questioning, without transparency, leading to a lack of trust. And I would argue that the whole thing started because everybody was so impatient to make money quick. So that's when the core values are out of whack. We end up in the wrong kind of innovation. So there are innovation killers everywhere, and I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but just to say that we all look at those core values and say, of course that's the environment we want. But so many companies, whether it's through process and structure and tight metrics, or whether it is scarcity of resources and funding, people think that scarcity of resources brings out the best in people because it creates competition. Some scarcity creates competition and brings out the best. You go over the line of too much scarcity, and actually people then take the safe route and they don't take risks. And so too much scarcity actually stifles innovation. Commercialization, secrecy, whether it's through classification from the government or commercial IP, are innovation killers at the early stage of research because they stop collaboration. So there's all sorts of ways in which we go about our business, educate our kids. I argue that kids inherently are born with those 5 core values, with the exception of patience, and that we actually educate it out of them if you look at our education system. So just one word about leadership. I was talking about culture, and the way you manage or lead an organization at scale is very different than what you need to do to nurture innovation, especially disruptive innovation. And a lot of people ask me about large companies versus startups, and how is it different? And can you innovate in large companies? And what I would argue is that at scale, it's kind of like a factory farm. You want to mass produce things, and you want to have 0 defects, and you don't want surprises, and that's how you train your managers to lead that organization. And by definition, you get incremental innovation at scale, but you're very rarely going to get any disruptive innovation. To manage disruptive innovation is more like gardening. You need to make judgments based on instinct. You don't have hard data. You don't have customer validation. And so that is more, there is no rule book. It is more instinctive. And so what should large companies do? What large companies should do is surround themselves with small greenhouses and gardens. That may be inside the company, managed by different types of people, different techniques, or by connecting to universities or startup organizations. So I'm going to switch now, and the second part of this is talk a little bit about the country and what I see as the decline in our national ecosystem. Everything that I've just talked about applies to individuals, applies to organizations, and applies to the country or the world in terms of framework. But if you think about what we've gone through here in the United States, and I'm not going to go through this in detail. I would encourage you to read the book. There are 3 chapters dedicated to this. The first one's called Inspirational Innovation. The second one is called Narrowing Horizons, and I can't believe I can't remember the name of the last one, is Accelerating Out of Control. So you can get a sense from those titles as to kind of what happened. And these are leaves. Green is good. Brown is not good. And in the 50s and 60s, we came out of World War II and the Cold War and the threat of Sputnik, and the way our leaders responded inspired innovation and science in the country. In the 70s, we started to narrow our horizons in terms of research funding, both in the federal government as well as in corporations, as competitiveness forced organizations to focus on efficiency and less on investing in the future. Startups thrived through the 90s. Most people say to me, come on, the bubble was all about innovation. The 90s, the second half of the 90s was all about greed. It was not about innovation. And actually there was a shift in Silicon Valley from focusing on building and solving problems to how do I make the most money? And that's when innovation in startups started to decline. Now in the 2000s, we had three things. We had the internet bubble burst, we had the corporate scandals, and the tragedy of 9/11. And the combination of those things, but more importantly, how national and business leaders reacted to those three events, made everything fall off a cliff. And in the end, we became incredibly risk averse. We stopped questioning, we lost our trust, and the core values that I talked about became severely undermined, not to mention just our overall respect for science in the country. So what does it take to turn it around in 2010? I don't believe we can be green in 2010, but I'd like to see us starting to turn yellow again. And a big step was taken last year in terms of the leadership of the country. But we can't go back to the model of the 50s and the 60s. The answer is not to go build Bell Labs again, because the world has fundamentally changed. And as we look for solutions to the problem, we have to recognize all the changes that have occurred. And I've just listed a couple of them here. The first and most significant is globalization. And we shouldn't see this as a zero-sum game. It's not us versus, it's us and. And the reason a lot of people ask me about the name of the book and ask me what is the gap I'm talking about. Am I talking about the gap between us and China or us and some other country? And actually I'm not. I'm talking about the gap between where we are and where we were, and the gap between, more importantly, the gap between where we are and what our potential is and where we need to be. Now, we need to partner with everybody around the world, and it is best for us if the whole world is innovative. But it's a disaster for us if the rest of the world is innovative and we are not, because you can't partner well from a position of weakness. You need to partner from a position of strength. So we don't need to be the singular power in innovation in the world. We need to be a strong player in the global innovation ecosystem. And so we really need to keep that in mind. And so many people talk about leadership in terms of test scores and in terms of patents. And unfortunately, those are often the wrong metrics. The accelerated pace, no question, things move faster now. It is much harder to analyze and to think, but you know what? This accelerated pace is not an excuse not to think. It is not an excuse not to invest in the future. You just have to think faster, and you have to use the tools to analyze faster and better. Clearly, the internet and the web have changed everything. Let's remember that it amplifies both good and bad. And so as we move forward, we need to understand that. The problems ahead of us are more complex and more interdisciplinary than ever before. And so our solutions to how the ecosystem works and is built needs to be adapted to take that into account. And then actually when I was writing the book, I thought I was going to have a problem explaining to people that there was going to be an economic problem as a result of our lack of investment in innovation. Well, the book came out September 1st, so I didn't have to explain that for very long. But if you look today at the other thing that we really need to understand as change, unfortunately, is the financial crisis and the state of the economy, because this is, as we know by now, maybe last September people thought it was a blip. It's not a blip. And it is something that has fundamentally changed our environment. And the only silver lining of it is maybe there's a chance to reset some of our values. Maybe there's a chance to learn from our failures and go forward and take some lessons. On the other hand, we have a loss of trust, and I already talked about the importance of trust to innovation, so we have to figure out how to rebuild that trust in our government, in our business leaders, in our banks. We have incredible liquidity limitations, and liquidity is what drives the business part of the ecosystem. We really need to focus on sustainable growth. I can't believe it, but I actually hear people in Silicon Valley saying, all we need to do is find the next bubble. And when I hear that, I just want to scream, because that's exactly what we don't need to do. What we need is to focus on sustainable economic growth. And we're going to have to adapt to new models of business, government, nonprofit collaboration. And I put collaboration in quotes here because we've been forced into some weird dynamics that we're going to have to figure out what is the right answer long term. So many people I interviewed in the business environment, as opposed to scientists or academics, I would talk about the problem, and their answer to me would be, Judy, this is cyclical, the market will take care of itself. I think we now recognize that the market will not take care of itself because the market has become the problem. It's too short-term focused. And so we have to, on the other hand, the government cannot run businesses. So we need to find that right new balance, and it may be in one, it's gone to one extreme, it may need to go in the other extreme for a while and come back somewhere, not extreme, but let the pendulum swing for a while to come back to the middle. So what are some of the things that we need to do to rebalance the innovation ecosystem? I'm going to talk real quickly about a couple of things in the research environment, the business climate, future generations, and then leadership. These are not meant to be complete solutions by any means. In the research community, there's no question that we need a rebirth of science policy in this country after too long of just ignoring science and ignoring the importance of science to everything we do. And electing Obama brings a lot of hope, but we need to realize that policy is not just at the federal level, it's at the federal, state, local level when you're starting to influence education, so funding as well as policy. And the White House alone, change in the White House doesn't necessarily change the dynamics of the legislature. And you know, it's interesting that I don't think it's true of this Congress, but the Congress before, less than 5% of the people in Congress indicate their former professions being anything to do with science, either medicine, science, or engineering. If you look at China, 8 out of their 10 top leaders are engineers. So there's just a gap. There's a lack of understanding that I would say that it is up to us to make sure that the right people are being educated. We need increased and consistent funding for basic research from government, corporations, and nonprofits across disciplines. And that word consistent is really important, because when we do these up and down types of fundings, they don't do anybody any good. We need to relook at the allocation mechanisms to assure balance across time, meaning both funding short-term research as well as higher risk long-term, across fields, across demographics, meaning young researchers as well as not so young researchers. It's very important to fund bright young minds, but I will also say that we shouldn't forget about the people who have the experience and a little more patience that need to mentor those bright young minds. We need to align the incentives of academia to really support interdisciplinary research, and encourage our young researchers to take a long view, because too much of what we're doing is getting young researchers to focus on today and tenure track and publish, which often encourages a short-term safe view as opposed to a long view. And we need to acknowledge that the responsibility of research used to be balanced between industry and academia. Industry has essentially exited the research business in most cases. Not all, but most. And what that means is research has fallen squarely on the shoulders of academia. We need to make sure that the funding goes along with it. But this has also created a lab gap, which is that ability to iterate and build something at scale and test it out before it becomes a commercial product. If you're Google, you can go from Stanford to a venture-funded startup without something in between. If you're building researching alternative energy or in life sciences or other fields, you can't. You can't go from an academic lab to a company, and there's a gap in the middle that we need to address. How do we get business back on track? This is actually even harder than academia, because we have to figure out a way to extend the business horizons and look at the unintended consequences of policy and incentives that are forcing short-term behavior. And there's such a push from Wall Street to get people to only think about this quarter and this year, and it takes really, really strong CEOs to stand up for that and to continue to invest in the future. Really, Wall Street shifted over the last couple of decades. They value trading and flipping over building and creating. And that investment of the future is no longer even taken into account when you're valuing a company today. And you know, the average tenure of a CEO is 3 years. So if a CEO doesn't think they're going to be there longer than 3 years because of the kind of knee-jerk reaction of corporate boards, how can you really think long-term? And I could go on for hours on what is broken in the entrepreneurial VC ecosystem, but let me just say that venture capitalists have become so risk-averse, wanting validated markets. The angel investors that used to invest in very early stage companies don't have as much money to invest. And I will say it's not all the VCs. Entrepreneurs have become more entitled, believing that, not recognizing how hard work it is, how many companies fail, and how much sweat equity you need to invest. And so on both sides of the equation, we need to get that ecosystem back in balance. So in addition, we have the challenges of all I could think of to title this slide, of the economic mess that we are in. And you know, as all of us are reading and looking at what's happening with the stimulus package and bailouts, and the real difficulty here is what every business leader faces, what every parent or individual faces, and it's this balance of short and long term. How do you make decisions that stop the spiraling down that is going on in our economy today, and how do you take the actions to stop that downturn while still investing in the future? And we have to figure out ways to do both. We cannot use this economic crisis as an excuse to not invest in innovation, because it is innovation that is going to create the jobs 5 and 10 years from now. So it's fine to have a stimulus package, and we need a stimulus package to get people back to work this year and next year. But you know what? We're going to need jobs 5 years from now, and we're going to need jobs 10 years from now. And it's investing in the innovation ecosystem, which is part of our country's infrastructure, that is going to make sure that we have those jobs. And it's interesting how polarized everything has become. And one of the polarizations that has occurred is you're either a populist or you're pro-business. And that's a very short-term view, because if you take a long-term view, if you think about it, the businesses in the US have enjoyed economic growth over the last 5 years because the middle class in other countries has risen. So they are growing off of the economies of selling into China or India or other developing nations, not our middle class, because our middle class has been going down. It's been hit by the credit crisis. But ultimately, we need a thriving middle class in the US if business is going to continue to grow. On the other hand, an individual is not going to have a job if there's not an economy that is growing. So if you take a long-term view, it's not about business or populist. Those two things really come together. And that's, again, why it's so important for people to be not just thinking about today. And in all of these problems, we need to move beyond the silos that are stopping us from solving them. And there are silos everywhere. So whether it is between the communities of the ecosystem, we need better collaboration between academia and businesses, and the application stage. We need better collaboration between fields of science. We need better collaboration between science, technology, and the arts. Not only does science and technology have phenomenal impact on the arts, as we see in terms of distribution of music or of videos, but the arts have an impact on science. And if you think about what's happened in video games and building virtual worlds, and then bring that into the scientific community and how it can help scientific research. We need to break down the silos of political parties and federal, state, and local government. So we have all of these silos that we really need to think about. How do you break them down? And we need deep experts, but we need what are called T people, deep in one field, but the ability to communicate across. That's a IDEO and Stanford Design School term. But I maintain we also need double T's. That's something I made up, which is deep, having depth in two disciplines and the ability to communicate across. And we need connectors. And connectors are those people who may not be really deep in anything, but get B's in lots of subjects, so that they're deep enough to synthesize, to collect from multiple disciplines and synthesize them. So as we're thinking about how we educate and how we develop the next generation, we need to think about these capabilities. Interestingly enough, it's the connectors that are often thrown out of organizations. They don't fit in anybody's box. They don't excel in anything, and often they are discounted. They are often the most important people in an organization by bringing people together. And then last, well, next to last is next generation innovators. And there is no innovation that's more important than developing young minds. And our education system and our culture actually right now are working against innovation, not for it. So in creating a foundation for the future, what are the things that when I'm talking to people who are thinking about K through 12 education or undergraduate education, what are the things that we need to think about? 21st century innovators need to be adaptive. So it's almost more important to learn how to learn than it is the subject that you are learning, because the world is changing so quickly. And I'm not saying you don't need fundamentals. You need fundamentals across the sciences, math, and the liberal arts. But you really need to have an adaptiveness in there and a capacity for change. You need to learn to frame questions, not just answer them. And right now our education system is focused on answering questions. We don't give any teachers any time to encourage people to frame those questions. We need our kids to be experiencing playfulness, exploration, experimentation, because that's the fun of innovation. And if innovation's no fun, why is anybody going to want to become an innovator? Developing active patience. I say active because you still want to move forward, but those of us who have lots of experience with the generations whether it's Generation X or the millenniums, there's not a lot of patience going around. And people who have grown up being able to Google for an answer or take a pill to solve a problem, there's a sense of instant gratification there. Learn how to be collaborative, not just online and in person. And I think that the online tools are wonderful in terms of collaboration. I worry a little bit that we're going to raise a generation that's going to understand how to collaborate online, but when they're actually face-to-face with people, they're not going to know how to exchange ideas. And we need to make sure that we're doing both. Getting exposure to multiple disciplines, and then having a basic level of scientific and technological literacy has become mandatory for everybody to make decisions of how you live, how you work, how you vote. K through 12 problem is the most severe, but I would say that higher education also needs to adapt, whether it's the undergraduate programs. Business schools, in my mind, are really oriented towards churning out investment bankers that we don't need right now, or consultants, and vocational and community schools. And then I will point out that our culture, the messages we send our kids, whether it's the media or as parents, is actually a bigger problem than education and may be harder to fix. And again, I won't go into it here. And then finally, let me just say a word about leadership, and I'm not leaving enough time for questions. And these are really, really challenging times. And there are many people who say that threats bring out the best of innovation because necessity is the mother of innovation. And some people will point to the fact that we've been too comfortable as a reason why innovation has slowed in this country. But there are two ways to deal with threats. And as a leader, this is something that is really important to understand the difference between. You can take a threat and use it to make people afraid, and essentially afraid and helpless. And after 9/11, that's what was done. There was a threat. There was lots of people out there that were going to hurt us. We were told about the threats and reminded, told that we would be protected, and that we should go shopping. Because the message was, we want the economy to keep going, we'll protect you. So when people are afraid and helpless, it actually turns off the executive function in their brain. And that turns off innovation. So what is the right way to deal with these threats, whether it is something like terrorism or an economic crisis, is you take the threat, you turn that threat into a challenge to rally people with, and you use inspiration instead of fear. And if you explain the challenge and get people involved in helping to address the challenge, you turn on that executive function, and that turns on the innovator. And if you think about what JFK did in suggesting we put a man on the moon, if you look at the leadership and how we responded to Sputnik, we didn't just build a bigger rocket, we inspired scientists for generations. So it is really important, and we now have someone at a national level who gets it. So we have made a shift at the top from leading through fear to leading through inspiration. But it's not enough to have it at the top. And the fact of the matter is the way people run companies, the way people run departments, the way parents interact with their families, all matter in how we impact the psyche of the country. And so not everyone wants to or can be a leader of people, but everybody is really a leader in terms of their own path and their own surrounding community. And so I would encourage you to think about this difference between dealing with the threats that are out there and being scared and helpless versus using them to inspire either yourself or others. And I often get asked from people who have read the book that I bring up so many challenges, how is it that I seem optimistic? And my response is always that, there are two ways you can react to the types of problems that are out there. You can be overwhelmed, and it is really easy to be overwhelmed today. And when you're overwhelmed, you don't do anything. Or you can be optimistic while being realistic and try to carve out some way that you can make a difference. And so I choose optimism because I have to hope that we will get through this for the sake of my son who just started college. So I tell him it's a good time to be in school, and 4 years from now, or 6 years from now, I want to make sure that he has an environment that he's walking into that is a lot better than where we are today.
Judy, thank you very much.